I received a good question in regards to emotional reactivity and how to really handle that. To what extent can you even allow the reaction? And sometimes when you just, unconsciously react and afterwards feel guilty, right? How to handle that guilt. So there are many subtle dynamics going on with this, especially when you're going deeper into the spiritual practice. So I wanted to really clear up all those confusions and answer this question in detail. So I'll read it out real quick. By the way, I know the lighting situation isn't perfect right now in my current videos. I'm just moving in about a month or so the whole setup will change. So bear with me. The question is, I wanted to ask one question. Sometimes, and by the way, this question is by Gaurav, and he asked, sometimes I feel anger arising or other emotions, which I know if acted on will not create so good consequences. But there is another feeling or thought that says, if I'm not acting on this sensation or feeling, I'm just suppressing it. Let the energy flow free. I understand that both of these are mere thoughts, but not able to get a breakthrough. Also, not acting on emotional surge, is it good or bad? Isn't it suppression? The very recent example being, I was a bit irritated 2 days back. Small things were making me furious. Had arguments at home over trivial things. I noticed the anger arising, body becoming stiff, tensed, the changes in breath, but couldn't hold back and acted. And later there was guilt. The anger was not needed. Is it okay to be free-flowing, acting, and detached from actions you performed? Or to never act on what is arising, an impulse or a thought? So very good question, because it has many different layers. And the answer is not simply a yes or a no. It is a little bit of both. So one thing you'll see is that as you are going about this spiritual practice, your experience, whether it be your relationship or your work, your partner, your experience will very creatively, in ways that you could not have ever planned, it will provoke you. It will bring to the surface all that is unconscious within you. It will bring to the surface your conditioning, and that's unique for everybody. In some cases, it's anger. Some cases it's insecurity, fear. It will bring all these things to the surface. I basically call all of this your lower nature. Your lower nature, which has a foundation, core belief of being just a little body, a person, in a big world that exists outside and independent of it. On top of this belief, when we act, right? On top of this belief, we feel anger, jealousy, hatred, selfishness. This is our lower nature. So your lower nature will constantly be provoked to arise when you go through difficulty, challenge, hard times, when something outside of you is not going the way that you planned, or something that you don't want. And your spiritual practice, one of the main aspects of this practice is that when your lower nature is being provoked, that you no longer just act on behalf of that lower nature, that you become conscious of your lower nature, you become conscious of your conditioning arising to the surface. And rather than believing that it is happening because something on the outside, that is somebody else's fault or something else's fault, and rather than dwelling in the story of what happened and why you feel this way, that you learn to observe your emotions. You learn to observe the narratives that are arising in mind because of what's happening. And rather than just simply believing in the narrative and the action that it wants to just pull you into, and rather than just believing in the emotions and just identifying with the emotions, becoming the anger, becoming the fear, that you learn to observe. Step out of the story. Observe the sensation. Observe the emotion. Observe even the narrative that's arising, saying this and that, from a distance. Rather than being the thinker of that narrative, you learn to see it as you're objectifying it. You're able to see it from the third person. You're able to see it from outside, no longer being so easily influenced by just what it has to say. From there, you gain you gain a certain bit of choice, meaning that you have the choice to no longer act on that anger, that you have the ability to observe yet not react or buy into the story of conflict and something outside of you being, your perpetrator, something is making you feel this way, rather than buying into that whole projected worldview and further getting entangled in your conditioning by reacting and fighting and conflict, that you're able to observe, let go, and transcend. So when you observe, let go, and don't just react based off of that, and you transcend, you start to see that these impulses, these urges, your lower nature becomes weaker and weaker. It arises less and less. When you just begin this, it may continue to arise very powerfully again and again and again, but over time, if you really devote yourself to this practice, you'll see that it starts to arise less and less powerfully, and you are less and less controlled by it. Its capacity to pull you into identification and make you act on behalf of that starts to weaken drastically. So now with that, right? Sometimes you do your best, yet you still react. Obviously, the first aspect of the practice is learning to catch it as it's arising and no longer just act on behalf of it unconsciously, but rather observe. So sometimes you do your best to do this, but the pull is so strong when the emotion arises, or the belief is so strong that something outside is wrong, something is causing you this. And you've believed that the solution is also to, get someone back or fight back or fight for your worth, fight, all these things, all these personal notions. So sometimes the pull is so strong that in the moment you're not able to catch yourself and you do react. And then later you see that, wow, my action was so influenced by the emotion, and sometimes you hurt somebody else. You act in a way that actually creates further dysfunction for you and others, suffering for you and others. And then later on, when you're no longer under the spell of that emotion, right? Because emotion creates like a whole world view of its own. When you are angry, when the anger arises, it influences your entire thinking, feeling, being, right? Everything. It changes the way you see the world. It's like a filter that gets put on your worldview. So later on, when you're no longer influenced by that anger, when the anger passes, you're able to see things more clearly because it's not filtered. It's not filtered through those goggles of anger. So you see that, oh, I did not need to act that way. I did not need to hurt somebody. I did not need to hurt myself. I didn't even have to suffer myself. If I could just see clearly at that time, I wouldn't have suffered and I wouldn't have caused others suffering. And I wouldn't have created more conflict for me either. So then arises with that guilt that you didn't catch it, guilt that you acted that way. And notice how in that moment you identify with the guilt. Now you become guilty. So you see that itself is also just you reacting to what arises rather than learning. That guilt is also just your conditioning. That guilt is also just your lower nature, which also is lying on the foundation of being a person controlling this or that. So even the guilt is identified with, which only further creates suffering for you. And as long as you are suffering, you will always create suffering for others, unknowingly, unconsciously. That's just how it goes. That's why you doing this practice is you're freeing yourself, but you're also freeing the world, because you'll no longer create suffering for yourself and you'll no longer create suffering for others. So the guilt arises and you again identify with it. But here again, the practice remains the same. You have to observe the guilt and no longer buy into the story of it. No longer buy into, oh, I could have acted this way and that way. These are all narratives. You're able to observe these narratives and drop them. You're able to observe the emotion of guilt and just allow it to be without letting it influence your worldview. You see, when you are just able to observe the emotion rather than be the emotion, right? So you're able to observe the anger rather than I am angry. Then no longer does the emotion become stuck in front of your seeing. No longer is the goggles that you're putting on. You're able to just observe it and it passes eventually. When you have no resistance towards what is arising, it arises and it passes. It can't come into, it can't become you. You don't give it that level of identification and belief. So it's the same with guilt. When this guilt arises that I could have acted better earlier, and right, that emotion of feeling bad, remorse for yourself and whatnot, that also is just, it's different than the anger, but it's actually just the same. It's just your conditioning. It's just your lower nature, which makes you a so-and-so person. So in that moment, even the guilt has to be observed. So you asked, so not acting on emotional surge, is it good or bad? Isn't it suppression? No, it is only suppression if you are identified with the anger, right? I am angry, rather than just being able to observe anger. When you are identified with the anger and you don't act on it, it's going to kill you on the inside. Yeah, of course, you hold yourself back from acting and hurting others, but then that hurt will just be inward turned and you're going to feel the burning wrath of that anger or guilt. And it's going to internally eat you up until eventually you do explode. Until, because it's still influencing your worldview, your understanding of yourself. So in that way, it would be suppression. But if you start to observe the anger and you start to observe the narratives it influences in your mind, and you acknowledge that which is observing me is not itself the anger, right? That which observes the anger is not itself angry. That which observes the thoughts is not itself a thought. What you are is ever present and free. It's like the space of this room. It's not affected by what is put inside of it. You're like that spacious awareness, which is not influenced by the emotions and the thoughts that arise within it. Right? You can put a really dirty object in this room. The space of this room doesn't get damaged. It's just a pure allowance of that emotion, of that object, even if it's dirty. So just like you're like that spacious awareness, and in it comes the emotion of anger or guilt, it doesn't affect the awareness itself. Awareness is just pure allowance, pure acceptance, embrace. And in it, the anger arises, it passes. Awareness is not damaged or lessened. So when you start to observe your emotions in this way, you start to wake up to this fact. And it's no longer a suppression. You can only suppress something as a person. I am this person with this thing and this emotion, and I'm suppressing this. But if you are the space in which everything arises, if you start to wake up to yourself as that, and there's no secret trick to this, it is simply observing what arises. You have to see so clearly that all that arises, all that appears, emotions, thoughts, perceptions, your experience, it's arising and subsiding, constantly changing, coming and going. Yet I do not come and go. I do not change. I am myself. I am me. I am aware. Awareness is never lessened or greater by what appears in it. It's never damaged or affected by what appears in it. It's just knowing. Okay? So as you begin to see that, you start to see that there is nothing to cling on to or resist. Space cannot cling to anything or resist anything. It has no concept of clinging or resisting. And it is free of whatever is being put inside of it. And in that way, you are too. So when you start to awaken to this, there's nothing such as suppression, because clearly there's no identification. Okay? Now, in regards to your question about like the doership, because you asked a question later. You said adjacent question to this. If you go by non-doership, right? Because as you go deeper into this teaching, you start to acknowledge that I am not really in control. So even that choice you gain by observing is not ultimately real. And there's another video I have about this. Maybe I'll link it up here so you can watch. But ultimately, you are not in full control as much as you think you are. So he said, if you go by non-doership, everything can be justified. Anger, hatred, or even a crime. The body and mind acted. I was just the witness. No accountability. How do we distinguish this? So yes, it is true that at the essence, at the core of it all, your control is illusory. You have no real control. Whether you observe and disidentified, or whether you just act upon it, ultimately it is not in your control. However, on the personal level, yes, you do have full control, and you are able to do your best, right? Your job is to do your best, because you have to see that nothingness and that everythingness is sort of together. So yes, while at the essence you are absolutely no control, but when you are the person acting about in the world, when you are practicing, when you are doing your spiritual practice, you have to go about it like you do have control and choice. And you exercising that choice, you exercising that control is part of it. Ultimately, you still don't, but that is the part of it. That is the way to free yourself from this. When you do act out in anger, when you do hurt others, even if you say at the essence, I have no control, you will still be subject to the consequences of those actions. Because again, on the level of personhood, this is the game. You are a person in a world, and there are consequences to your actions. So yes, you are also liable for those actions and those consequences. So you see, at the essence level, at the subtlest level, you are free from all of this. But at the personal level and the world level, you are bound to all of this. You have to act as the person and be and no longer give into your lower nature. And that is the personal journey also. That is your spiritual practice. You don't get to hide behind these fancy spiritual teachings that you've heard that I have no control, there's no doership. Because you'll see that when that actually becomes your actual experience and understanding, then you will naturally also take ownership of all of your actions without taking any real ownership that will make you suffer. You will naturally act more righteously. Because you see, to hurt others and to do all this, again, it requires a foundation belief of being a person, of having that limited identity. Only when you believe yourself as just a mere mind and body, then you act according to your lower nature. However, when you are free, when you have a deeper understanding of yourself, when your self-knowledge has a deeper, more subtler reference, and I hate to use the word deeper because it's not somewhere deep, it's you. But when you are coming from a subtler, deeper self-knowledge prior to just mind and body, then automatically you will no longer just give into your lower nature. So for now, yes, you still are subject to all of your actions and consequences, and you do have to do your best to practice in a personal way. You have to observe. You have to, no longer just react on behalf of your impulses and urges and emotions and sensations, because that is the disidentification process. That disidentification process doesn't happen by hiding behind the belief that you are awareness. This conceptual understanding will not help you at all. It has to become your experience. So let me just see if there's a part of your question that I didn't answer. So what I would recommend to you is, yes, do your best to no longer react. When these emotions are arising, you have to observe, right? Practice my acceptance teachings. You can check out my acceptance playlist on this channel. It will help you observe these sensations and emotions and live in pure acceptance, which is your nature, rather than giving into the narratives that arise, rather than reacting. So your practice has to be to learn to catch when these emotions are arising. You're able to observe and no longer just act on behalf of them. How to act? Act according to your best judgment, best understanding, right? Life demands a spontaneous response. And in that moment, you just simply have to do your best to act to the best understanding. Don't give in to your lower nature, which is always easier. So when you are able to do that, wonderful. When you are not able to do that and you do react and then later you catch yourself, then again, that is the moment of remembrance is your time of practice. So when that guilt is arising, don't just subscribe to the guilt and go with it. Observe even the guilt. As you devote yourself to this more and more, you will be able to catch yourself sooner and sooner, and you will be free of just being a reactive puppet to your conditioning. And the mind, body will also reflect the freedom that you are discovering within yourself. Okay? And in regards to non-doership, yes, at the essence, you have no control. However, live life like you are in control. Do your best. Act to the best of your understanding. Your lower nature requires you to just be a little person, and that's why you just tug about in the world and hurt yourself and others. But when you are working on this, you are going about your spiritual practice and you are trying to disidentify from your thoughts and emotions, clarity reflects in even the person and your thoughts and emotions and actions. And there's greater orderliness, greater harmony. And you will start to experience the freedom, of non-doership within doership. So that is ultimately how to stop being reactive and how to become more and more free in your thought, emotion, and action. If this is something that you want help with, if you want to finally become free of all these emotional reactions, if you want to learn to disidentify, break identification with your thoughts and emotions, and from just the personal identity, and you want to wake up to a greater freedom within yourself, you want to acknowledge and live at the understanding of these teachings, you want to understand yourself as the space of awareness in which all this is appearing, please learn more about my School of Awakening. I'm taking many people through this process, and it's absolutely incredible what you'll be able to experience just within the first 60 days. I do not promise you any crazy, unreal things, but simply just going deeper into this practice and turning your conceptual understanding into your direct experience, overcoming all of this reactiveness and suffering, and really waking up to who you really are. It is absolutely priceless. In the program, we make these teachings so practical and actionable that we're only focused on living this teaching, living the understanding, rather than just conceptually dwelling in it. So I give you the exact framework that you need, and the support that you need, and the environment that you need to start going way deeper into this. So that's why I always say, just within the first 60 days, you will experience such a massive shift in the understanding of what you are. You will no longer be suffering your thoughts and emotions. You will sink deeper and deeper into self-knowledge. You will learn to become absolutely still within yourself. And this inner stillness will burn all this delusion, all these belief systems, these egoic structures. And this clarity will begin to reflect in your thoughts, in your feelings, in your actions, in your experience of the world. It's absolutely freeing. So if that's something that interests you, I encourage you to apply for the program down below. I'll link it down below. It will be absolutely life-changing. And that's why I'm so passionate about it and the results that we've created for already our members. So you can book a call with me. I offer a free discovery call. But please only book that if you're really serious about this opportunity and you're dedicated and devoted to this, wanting to go deeper into this. I am fairly selective in who I choose to work with. But you can click the link below and book a call, and we can talk to see if this is right for you. I would absolutely love to help you take your conceptual understanding, and you may be perhaps struggling with these teachings, to just so effortlessly integrating it into your experience and finally experiencing the freedom that these teachings have to offer you. Okay? So learn more about that down below. I'll link it. My School of Awakening. But that's all from me for today. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope it helped you tremendously. I will see you next time.